In Gallery Bar booking games here for the Malamut Law pregame show. Mark Farzetta along with you, along with veteran Eagles reporter Derek Gunn and Eagles Hall of Famer Seth Joyner. And joining us right now to help us out on this panel, Adam Malamut himself. Adam, of course, you always do a great job representing the fan here on the pregame show. When you look at this game against the Commanders, Eagles 7-point favorites going into this one. You feeling a little confident about today's game?
You always ask me that confidence question, and every single time it makes me uncomfortable because I want to say yes, I'm always confident. But listen, you know, we can't discount the fact that Chase Young is playing like they thought he would play. Montez Sweat is another force on the defensive line. And we know that Jalen Hurts has not been the player that he was last year. So my answer to you is yes, I'm confident, but I don't want to be overly confident. I don't want to take for granted the fact that we're playing a team that has a bad record.
All right, so I'll ask you this then. Not so much about Jalen Hurts and the knee issue or anything like that, but it just comes down to that Week 4 matchup. We just went around the horn here talking about things that we want to see different when it comes to the run game, when it comes to the red zone, when it comes to the passing defense. Adding Kevin Byard to the mix here should help that. What do you want to see different from this matchup now versus what you saw in Week 4?
I want to see Jalen hold on to the ball. I want to see Jalen, if he's uncomfortable, just go down, man. Take the sack. But don't make bad decisions. You know, one of the interceptions that he had in the last game was just, it was a tip. You know, there was nothing that he could have done about that particular one. But no fumbles. Let's watch where we're throwing the ball. He's got a dynamic receiver set. Just make better decisions. You know, get back into the comfort zone that he was in previous years.
Now we've talked a lot about Jalen and then the knee issue, right? How much attention to pay to it and how much not. But one of the things that did come up on the injury report this week, and Gunnar, I'll ask you this question. We'll speak to John McMullen coming up in a minute from FedEx Field. But we're looking at a guy like Jordan Davis on that defensive line, Gunnar.
Right.
How much concern? You already look at Bradley Roby. He's going to be out for today's game with the shoulder injury. Then you have a hamstring injury right now with Jordan Davis. What's the expectation there? What do you know?
Well, Jordan Davis surfaced late in the week with a hamstring injury, and he was listed as questionable. Couldn't really get a determination on his availability on Saturday because all the Eagles had was a walkthrough practice. But talking back and forth with people this morning who were down on the field associated with the Eagles, he looked pretty good, and as well as we can be expected, he is active for today's game. Being active doesn't necessarily mean he's 100%, but he's good enough to play in this particular game. But when you're a guy of that size mass and you're dealing with a hamstring injury, it's something that you're going to have to watch closely in this game today.
You're inactives right now. Tanner McKee, obviously. Rashad Penny inactive again. Bradley Roby is inactive. Patrick Johnson. Moro Ojomo and Albert Big O. We'll just call him Big Al right there. Now let's go to FedEx Field and talk to our friend from JAKIB Media, of course, our NFL insider and Birds 365, John McMullen, who is at FedEx Field. John, what are the field conditions looking like right now at FedEx Field?
Oh, it's beautiful FedEx Field. You know that guy. So it's like the Shangri-La of the NFL. But yeah, I mean, from a turf perspective, it's, you know, there are worse stadiums. So, you know, players don't like playing in MetLife Stadium. So, you know, I can't speak to the gates. You know, that might fall on your quarterback, but the field should be fine.
Fair enough. We were just kicking around the injury issues right now with the Eagles. Fortunately, not that many, but Jordan Davis is active. He had the hamstring injury in practice. What's the expectation for his level of play today?
Yeah, I just saw Jordan going through some pregame stuff, testing out the hamstring. You mentioned, Mark, the inactives. He is active, so he's going to try to give it a go. But, you know, to me, the bigger question is he going to get his typical workload? The Eagles were very heavy 55-man punt team against Miami. Now, they only were out, I think, there for 48 defensive snaps. So it wasn't a lot anyway. But I think, you know, with Jordan kind of banged up, I think you might see more 40 fronts than 50, but we'll see how that shakes out. Obviously, it's been the best run defense in the NFL, and that foundation is built on Jordan Davis, so he's a key part to that.
Hey, John, Howie Roseman once again shocked us all by going out and getting Kevin Byard in the latter part of the week. Nick Sirianni singing his praises about how quickly he's grasped the Eagles' defensive concepts. You know, with Nick basically giving him a green light Do you expect him to be in there at least 90-95% of the plays?
Yeah, I would. You can't go over all the snaps, but I would say so. I would place it at 98%. Yeah, I think he's playing the whole game. I think he's playing the entire game. He's here for a reason. He's a veteran player. Remember some of these other guys the Eagles have brought in, Bradley Roby, Julio Jones. They were not playing. They were not in camps. They weren't on teams. So you have a bit of a ramp up period, a bit of a pitch count. I asked Nick that question on Friday. He said no pitch count. So it's more just how much of the defense does he know? Does he understand? Again, this is a veteran player. You saw it with C.J. Gardner-Johnson last year a little bit before week one, and the Eagles got him up to speed that quickly. I would say this is a player that's even savvier than C.J. I think he's going to be out there the entire game.
Hey, John, help me understand this this hamstring injury that Jordan Davis mysteriously came up with. You're 6'5", 345 pounds. I just need him to run from tackle to tackle. I don't need him running out in space. And I'm just trying to understand that because you don't see the big guys with hamstring injuries that often.
No, I don't think it's as serious as what a speed player says. So, hamstrings. Devontae Smith, for example, a couple of weeks ago came up with a hamstring, and he's been dealing with that. I was a little bit more concerned from that perspective because, thoroughbreds, as you like to call them at times, the fast players, that can linger, especially if you tweak it and you can make it worse. And a 2-week injury could turn to a 4-week injury, 6-week injury. I don't think that's as big a problem with Jordan Davis, but you're uncomfortable. Strength is a big part of his game. Obviously, he generally holds up against double teams and guys are pushing on him. And if you don't have that lower body 100%, it can make you effective. But he's out there and he's playing, and that says something. If there were any concern, I think he'd be inactive. I think they, especially if you think about the schedule, and while the Eagles don't like to admit this, I can admit this, Dallas is on the schedule next week. So the last thing you want to do is get Jordan Davis further injured before that game. So I think the fact that he's active is a very, very good sign.
John, Curtis Samuel was listed as questionable, a game-time decision, and we know that Sam Howell has Terry McLaurin and Dotson, but he's going to need every weapon he can against our Eagles defense. Have you seen him out there, Curtis Samuel, working out before the game? Have you heard anything about his status?
Yeah, as you're speaking about that, Adam, I'm just looking because the inactives just came out for each team, and Curtis Samuel is not on the Commanders' list. So, that means he's playing. Now, similar to Jordan Davis, what we just said, that doesn't mean he's going to be as effective or play as much as he typically does. But all the indications I get is it'll be a typical game for Curtis Samuel. And that's a big thing because the Eagles have used 8 different slot cornerbacks in 7 games. 8 different, think about that, 8 different slot cornerbacks in 7 games. I think it's going to be Sidney Brown today, getting most of the work in the slot, but you might see Josiah Scott, you might see some Eli Ricks. So that's been sort of the bugaboo for the Eagles defense this entire season. They've been able to persevere because of the defensive front has been so dominant for the most part. So many pressures, so much speeding up of opposition quarterbacks. And I think that's why you see Howie Roseman going out and making a deal like he did this week. They gave up 244 total yards and 10 offensive points to the best offensive football. But Howie's honest with himself and said, no, we have problems on the back end. We need to get better. And he might still be looking for a slot corner if he can find one. But it's been an issue. It'll continue to be an issue. And really, I wrote about it this week. The defensive front has really been the best slot cornerback on the Eagles.
Gotcha, John. When it comes to this Eagles offense, though, we've talked a lot about the run game and DeAndre Swift being a huge impact player in the first 3 weeks of the season, really weeks 2 and 3, a little bit into week 4, obviously, as well. And then that has kind of gone away in recent weeks here. How much has Cam Jurgens not being on the offensive line impacted their decision to run the football and Brian Johnson calling more run plays?
I don't think much. I mean, Cam's a better player, obviously, but I do think Sua has held up pretty well, and Cam's eligible to come back after this game. Saw him in the locker room a couple times. It seems like he's ready to go, so that's something to look forward to. But, the Eagles lead the league in rushing attempts, so I don't know if people know that, but Baltimore's number 2. They've rushed the football more than anybody else. So I'm not sure how much it's affected them. Now, Jalen Hurts is a big part of that as well, obviously. But, I think more of the impact on DeAndre Swift versus less impact had to do, if you go back all the way back to week 2 when he broke out, they were playing light fronts. Brian Flores came in and said, you know what, we're going to force him to throw the football. And he never came out of that, and he had a huge game. Other teams are playing the Eagles differently, paying more attention. Everybody has paid more attention to the run game than Minnesota, so it becomes more difficult. There's only 32 teams in this league, and if you're number 1 in rushing attempts, that means you're running the football more than anybody else. So I don't know if Sua had it. And by the way, Sua's reputation is he's a better run blocker than pass blocker. So if anything, it would kind of steer you in the other direction.
Hey, John, we were debating this earlier on the show about the Eagles cornerbacks showing so much respect to the opposition's wide receivers. And when you look at a guy like Sam Howell at this stage of the season who has to be somewhat shell-shocked, I mean, this kid's got 40 sacks on his ledger and is on pace to 97 sacks for a season. I would think it would make him a little bit more skittish. It's driven us nuts in a lot of ways how the Eagles cornerbacks like to play 7-8 yards off the ball. Do you anticipate them changing that, forcing the issue a little bit more, making Sam make quicker decisions, get their cornerbacks up in the wide receivers' faces, or is it going to be the same old storyline because that's what we've seen much of this season?
No, well, I think it's more philosophy-driven than anything else. We talk about that a lot. That's the philosophy of this particular defensive scheme that they run. They're trying to make teams go down the field, long drives, hoping for a negative play, a mistake. But when it comes to stuff like that, look, I think they gave a tremendous amount of respect to Tyreek Hill, but everybody does. I think they gave a tremendous amount of respect earlier in the season to Justin Jefferson, but everybody does. Other than that, I think it's typical business as usual, and that includes this Commanders team, which has some, don't get me wrong, they have some very good receivers, but they're not in the caliber of a Tyreek Hill or a Justin Jefferson. So I think that's dependent on opponent, but what's not dependent on opponent is that the Eagles are fueled by their defensive front, and that's where they speed up quarterbacks. That's the guys who are speeding up the quarterback. They're second pressures in the NFL, second quarterback hits, fourth in quarterback sacks. So they've been a very effective unit throughout this season. You could argue the most effective unit on the entire team. And the big reason why this defense is the 6th ranked defense in the NFL, because I just talked about the slot position. I asked James Bradbury this week, I said, James, have you ever seen anything like this? So many different bodies in the slot. And he said, no, never. Talked to Doug Peterson back when he was the Eagles coach. And I always remember what he told me. What's the quickest way for a season to get off the rails. He said multiple injuries at the same position. Well, the Eagles have gone through Avonte Maddox and Mario Goodrich and Eli Ricks and Sidney Brown and James Bradbury. Slay came in the slot for a few snaps against the Los Angeles Rams. On and on and on, different body after different body. Some injury. We don't even talk about Zach McPherson going back to the preseason. They've lost so many different slot cornerbacks. Bradley Roby's hurt now, and they've still persevered. The reason why? Because of that defensive front.
Hey, John, I'm just working through some numbers here because, I want to, talk about your comment that the Eagles have rushed the ball more than anybody in the National Football League. Sometimes, numbers, can be a little deceiving because if I take you through all the numbers of the Eagles' rushing attempts and how the NFL classifies rushing attempts. When a team drops back to throw the football and the quarterback has to take off, that play is no longer a pass play, it's deemed a running play, okay? So when my quarterback in week 1 runs the ball 9 times, in week 2 runs it 12 times, 10 times, 17 times, 18 out of 22 times, I think those numbers can be a little misconstrued because I believe that the true tell and the true barometer of how much a team is committed to running the football and how successful they are at running the football is determined by how many times you turn around and you hand the ball to your running back. See, to me, a passing play that turns into a running play is really not a passing play. So there's a little fallacy in that to me. I don't believe that the Eagles really want to run the football, to be honest with you, because if you really stop and think about it, they're only averaging right around 16 run plays to running backs throughout the entire season, with the exception of the Minnesota and the Tampa Bay game where they gave the ball to the running backs respectively 36 times and 30 times in a 48 and 40 carry run series. So that means that Jalen Hurts ran the ball 12 times against Minnesota and 10 times against Tampa Bay, and we have no way of really understanding whether those were run plays or whether they were pass plays until you really delve into the numbers. So I'm just going to continue to ring this bell because I believe that the Eagles are a much better, rushing football team than they give themselves the ability to be because they're not really committed to running the football the way that they need to be, and I think they need to become that. Listen, Washington's defense is giving up 125 yards per game rushing, and I know that they only had 104 the last time they played them, but if you get into one of those situations where you come out and you pass the ball all day today, this is going to be another one of those games where it's going to be touch and go all the way to the end instead of establishing the run and then get into the pass.
Yeah, well, it kind of works both ways, Seth. If you look at Baltimore, they're the number 2 team. Who's their quarterback? Obviously, if you're going to run the ball a lot, you're going to have a quarterback in the modern game who runs the football quite a bit. That's why Jalen Hurts and the Eagles are number 1. That's why Lamar Jackson and the Ravens are number 2. But, I've had this discussion with Shane Steichen a bunch when he was here. And Shane used to get mad because, there was a game last year where Jalen ran it 16 times. And he got a lot of criticism. Can't run the quarterback that much. And Shane was like, we had 4 designed runs in that game for Jalen Hurts. And, sometimes if you call an RPO, it can go run or it can go pass. Mm-hmm. Now, the Eagles aren't doing as much RPO this year as they have last year, but they still run more than anybody else in the NFL. This year, Brian Johnson noted, and he got criticized for this, the bubble screens. He called them an extension of the run game. And people say, well, it's a pass, but it's not a run. From a coaching perspective, you're trying to accomplish the same thing. You just see the numbers it becomes a numbers game. There's too many people in the box. You think you have an advantage outside. You kick it out with the quick screen, and they consider that an extension of the running game. Where I will agree with you is, but the Eagles are no different. It's a modern game. Their philosophy is you pass to run the ball. Back in different eras, you ran the ball to pass the ball. Now it's the exact opposite. You pass the football to get the lead, and then you run the football to close out the game and get out of the clock. So from that standpoint, I agree with you, but that's no different than anybody else in this league, with the possible exception of a Tennessee with Derrick Henry in the past. But always with those teams, they don't have quarterbacks they're confident in.
Mm-hmm.
So would you rather be in that position? I would argue I would rather have a quarterback I'm confident in.
And John, I would even challenge the numbers or that assertion that, that the short passing game is an extension. If I go back to the Jets game, if that's really the way that you see it, then why didn't you stick with that? Because you had 3 interceptions in that game, where if, the short passing game is really an extension, because they came out early in the year, early in that game, and they did pass the ball early. If I remember correctly, DeAndre Swift had quite a few catches in that 19-play drive, okay? They went right down the field. Now, if you're going to call that an extension of the run game, okay, then why wouldn't you stick with that as the game went on? You continue to see that your quarterback was struggling a little bit, and I talked about it earlier. I said, Murphy's Law was in effect. Every single thing that could go wrong. You had a fumble. You had a ball that bounced off your tight end's chest. You had another ball, that was tipped or, hit his arm, So why didn't you stick to that? Because, a lot of the issues that the Eagles have sometimes is that they want to be explosive and they want to push the ball down the field. But you have to earn the right to do that, and the way that you earn the right to do that is with your short passing game and your running game. I think that's why Tom Brady was so successful all the years that because Tom was willing to take whatever the defense gave you just so he could move the chains and score every single possession. Okay, the Eagles get impatient sometimes. And when they get impatient, that's where they get in trouble, because they want to be explosive. They'll take the short stuff for the first couple of drives, but then all of a sudden they start trying to force it down the field, and you cannot do that. You've got to force the defense to give you the look that you want so that you can now take what you want. But if the defense is just going to play the way that it plays, you can't force the ball down the field, when it's just not there. And the Eagles, to me, sometimes don't seem like they're patient enough to play the game that way. If the object of the game is to win, then you do whatever is necessary, and if that's the short passing game or the run game, or if team wants to show you the blitz and you're going to pick it all up and then throw it downfield, then you do that.
Well, I would say, Brian's answer to that would be, you're not throwing a bubble screen to throw a bubble screen. You're throwing a bubble screen because you have the numbers and the defensive scheme is steering you in that direction. Most offenses, not all the time, but the vast majority of the time, come up to the play with 2 options, a run or a pass option. You hear quarterbacks all over the league, kill. Used to hear it a lot with Carson Wentz. They're killing from one play to another, generally a pass to a run, or vice versa, because the play call has 2 different options built into it. Back in the days of Bill Walsh, and here's how a bunch of offensive coaches have described it to me. Today they teach philosophies. They used to teach plays, the West Coast offense. Now they don't have as much practice time. This is a bigger discussion. We could probably do a 3-hour show on this. So they want to get the guys up to speed. So they're teaching them, if the 3 safety is here, the football goes here. If there's 6 people in the box, the Eagles you're only going to see that 1 week. You saw it in week 2. They ran the football down their throat. They're not going to see that again. So they have proven they will take advantage of what the defense has given them. They've done that pretty consistently. And then their trump card to you, Seth, I would say, if the goal is to win the game, well, they win an awful lot of games. And, we're at 23-2 of Jalen Hurts' last 25 starts. And the two losses, to be honest, you can boil them down to the same thing. Turnovers. Washington last year, they turned it over 4 times. They were -3. This year against the Jets, they turned it over 4 times. They were -4. That's why they lost the football game. So when they take care of the football, they have generally proved they will do what it takes to win a particular football game.
John, I think that I may even lead the group of Eagles fans that are frustrated with Brian Johnson and his play calling. Jalen Hurts is our franchise quarterback. There's no question about that. Jalen Hurts has a left knee that he's nursing. There's 2 guys on the defensive line for the Commanders that have the ability to get to Jalen Hurts. To Seth's point, we're extremely effective when the Eagles run the ball and they run it through a running back. Why would they not take advantage of this opportunity in this matchup to keep guys who can get to the quarterback off of your franchise quarterback, preserve him, get him to the next game, and at the same point, use those huge guys that you have up front that can move mountains? We've seen this. We've seen this offensive line literally, what they did with the Rams was a great testament to how they were able to neutralize, probably the best defensive lineman in the last 15 years in Aaron Donald. So why wouldn't they use that and run the ball, give DeAndre Swift his touches? And I heard what you just said about pass to set up the run to close out the game. But don't you have to adapt to the competition that you're playing week to week with the conditions that you have week to week?
Yeah, that would be their argument. That's why I bring up the week 2 game. There was a defense that came in that said, we're going to take away the passing game. We think that's the best way to beat you. And the Eagles ran the football for whatever it was, 200-plus yards. DeAndre Swift had the big coming out game. To Brian's point, the expectations were so high. I would just point to they have the 3rd-ranked offense, they have the 4th-ranked rushing offense, they have the 9th-ranked passing offense, so they're technically better running the football than passing the football. They're 4th in points per game, they're 2nd and 3rd down offense, they're 4th and 4th down offense. The one thing they've struggled in is red zone offense, and even that's been improving. They were 4 of 5 last week, essentially 4 of 6 on paper, but the last one they were running out the clock, so they were really 4 of 5, and they've gone from 27 to 23 to 19, so they're going up incrementally. I would say to most of the fan base who complains about this offense, what are you watching? And if you are watching, watch some other teams, because there's not many teams in the NFL that are top 10 in every single meaningful offensive category.
John, last thing for you here, your official prediction for Eagles Commanders today.
Washington has played the Eagles a little bit tougher, but that has generally happened at Lincoln Financial Field for some odd reason. The Eagles have had tremendous success in recent seasons here at FedEx Field. I can see already Eagles fans will take over the stadium, so not much has changed from that perspective. The Commanders are on the brink. Everybody's talking about the trade deadline. They might move Chase Young. They might move Montez Sweat. And they're coming off a really bad loss with the New York Giants. I think the Eagles are going to win the game. It's probably a little bit closer division game than people might like or expect, but I think it'll be a 28-17 game. And I don't think the Eagles will be threatened all that much.
Fair enough. John McMullen, Birds 365, our NFL insider here at JAKIB Media. Thanks so much, John.
Hey, thanks, guys.
All right, we're going to continue the analysis for this game. Also hope to get a special announcement in by the end of the show about what we could be doing at the end of this football season. All that and more coming up here on the JAKIB Media Pregame Show.